the steel gauntlet struck the dirt with a sound that felt heavier than the silence of 50,000 people holding their breath. In the center of the arena, the man they called the Iron Stray stood over the broken body of the king's champion. He didn't cheer. He didn't raise his arms. He just stared at the royal box. "Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand the kingdom of Hytera. It was a land of gold, silk, and absolute corruption. King Thorn sat on the throne, a man who had never fought a battle in his life but had won every war through poison and politics. Beside him sat Queen Seraphina. She was known as the bird in the gilded cage. She was breathtakingly beautiful, always draped in diamonds, but her eyes were dead. Rumor had it she hadn't spoken a word in public in 3 years. The tournament of the Golden Sun was the highlight of the decade. The prize was staggering, 10,000 gold crowns, enough to buy a small country, and a title of nobility. Enter Garrick. No one knew where he came from. He wasn't a knight. He wore armor that looked like it had been scavenged from dead men on 3 different battlefields. It was mismatched, dented, and ugly. But he moved like a thunderstorm. Through the qualifiers, he had dismantled dukes, counts, and famous knights with a brutal efficiency that terrified the nobles. He didn't fight with honor, he fought to survive. He used headbutts, elbows, and dirt in the eyes. Now, he stood in the final circle. His opponent was Sir Lancelin, the White Lion, King Thorn's personal bodyguard and the deadliest swordsman in the Empire. The fight had lasted 20 minutes. It was a masterpiece of violence. Lancelin was fast, graceful, dancing around the arena like a fencer. Garrick was a rock. He took hits that would have felled an ox. His left arm hung uselessly by his side, the shoulder dislocated early in the fight, but Garrick had one thing Lancelin didn't: hunger. When Lancelin lunged for the killing stroke, aiming for the gap in Garrick's neck armor, Garrick didn't block. He stepped into the blade. The sword pierced his side, grating against his ribs. The crowd gasped. But Garrick used the proximity to grab Lancelin's helmet with his good hand. With a roar that shook the stadium, Garrick slammed the knight's head into his own armored knee. Once. Twice. The White Lion went limp. Garrick shoved the unconscious champion to the ground. He ripped the sword from his own side, grunting as blood stained his rusted chainmail. He was the last man standing. King Thorn stood up, his velvet robes shimmering in the sun. He clapped slowly. The crowd followed suit, a hesitant applause. They were terrified of this savage, a brutal display. King Thorn shouted, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the arena. But a victory is a victory. Step forward, warrior. Garrick limped toward the royal box. He stopped 10 paces away. He was bleeding from 3 wounds. He looked like a nightmare. "You have entertained us," the king sneered, clearly disgusted by the commoner's appearance. "The prize is yours. 10,000 gold crowns. And I.W. Sir Garrick of the Lowlands. Kneel and accept your reward." Servants rushed forward carrying heavy chests of gold. They opened them, and the sunlight caught the coins, dazzling the crowd. It was a fortune beyond imagination. Garrick didn't look at the gold. He didn't look at the king. He looked at Queen Seraphina. For the first time in years, the queen's eyes focused. She saw the blood on his armor. She saw the way he stood. And beneath the grime and the beard, she recognized something. Her hand went to her throat. Garrick turned his gaze to the king. "I refuse the gold." The hush that fell over the stadium was instant. Even the wind seemed to stop. To refuse the king's prize was an insult punishable by death. "You refuse?" Thorn laughed, a cold, nervous sound. "You are a fool, then. Take the title and leave, before I change my mind and give your head to the dogs." "I refuse the title, too," Garrick rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. I fought under the old laws. The laws of the founders. King Thorn's smile vanished. The old laws are dust. What are you babbling about? The law of the victor's right, Garrick shouted, turning so the crowd could hear him. Chapter 4, Verse 1. If a champion defeats the king's own defender in single combat, he may refuse the coin and claim one object of equal value from the king's household. The scholars in the front row began to whisper frantically. He was right. It was an ancient law, forgotten by most, but never repealed. Take a horse then. Thorn snapped, waving his hand dismissively. Take a ship. Take a castle. I don't care, I don't want a castle, Garrick said. He pointed a blood-stained finger at the royal box. Not at the king. Next to him, I claim her. The crowd followed his finger. I claim the queen. King Thorn froze. His face went from pale to a deep, violent purple. You dare. He whispered. You dare insult me. You claim my wife. She is not your wife, Garrick said, his voice rising. She is a spoil of war. You took her kingdom by force. You forced her into marriage to silence her people. By the old law, she is property of the crown. And by the right of combat. I claim the prize. It was a suicidal technicality. Garrick was calling the queen property to use the king's own misogynistic laws against him. He was gambling that the king's obsession with law and order would trap him. Guards. Thorn shrieked, spitting saliva. Kill him. Cut him down where he stands. 50 royal guards drew their swords and vaulted over the arena walls. They charged toward the wounded, exhausted man in the center of the pit. Garrick didn't flinch. He looked up at the queen. Seraphina, he roared. Do you accept the claim? Queen Seraphina stood up. The apathy was gone. In her eyes, a fire that had been extinguished for 3 years suddenly roared back to life. She looked at the husband who tormented her, and then at the battered warrior who had just signed his own death warrant for her. I accept, the queen screamed, her voice breaking the stunned silence. I submit to the champion. The crowd erupted. It was chaos. The king was screaming orders. The guards were closing in. Garrick picked up the sword of the fallen white lion. He was one dying man against an army, but he smiled, because for the first time in years, the queen was looking at him not as a stranger, but as the man she had loved before the world fell apart. The 50 royal guards hit the sand like a golden wave, their boots kicking up dust that mingled with the metallic scent of spilled blood. They were the king's elite, men bred for war, clad in armor that cost more than a peasant's lifetime earnings, and Garrick was one dying man with a stolen sword and a dislocated shoulder. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The walls of the arena were 30 feet high and smooth stone. The only exits were barred. He tightened his grip on the white lion's sword, the leather hilt slick with sweat. He shifted his stance, tucking his useless left arm tight against his body to protect his exposed ribs. Come on then. Garrick roared, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the sand. Die for a tyrant. The first 3 guards reached him. They were overconfident, expecting the wounded man to cower. The first swung a heavy mace. Garrick didn't block, his arm would have shattered. Instead, he dropped to his knees, sliding under the swing. The mace whistled harmlessly overhead. In the same fluid motion, Garrick thrust upward. The white lion's blade, forged of Valerian steel, found a gap in the guard's groin armor. The guard screamed and collapsed. Garrick used the man's falling body as a shield against the second attacker's spear, shoving the dying soldier forward. The spear embedded itself in the guard's breastplate. It was brutal. It was ugly. It was the fighting style of a man who had learned to survive in the gutter. Not the academy. Hold the line, the guard captain bellowed, signaling his men to surround the stray. Circle him. Bleed him. Up in the royal box, King Thorn was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white. What are you waiting for? Archers. Shoot him. We cannot, sire, the commander of the archers shouted back, his face pale. "The queen. She is in the line of fire." Thorn turned to look at his wife. Seraphina hadn't retreated to the safety of the inner chambers. She was standing at the very edge of the low balcony, her knuckles white on the stone balustrade, her eyes locked on Garrick. "Get back, you stupid woman!" Thorn hissed, reaching out to grab her arm. Seraphina whipped around. The bird in the gilded cage was gone. In her place was a lioness. She slapped the king's hand away, a sound that cracked like a whip, shocking the nearby nobles into silence. "If he dies," Seraphina said, her voice low and venomous, "I will burn this city to the ground. I know where you hide the treasury, Thorn. I know which lords you bribed. I will scream your secrets from the highest tower until the peasants tear you apart." Thorn stared at her, stunned by the sudden transformation. In that second of hesitation, the dynamic in the arena shifted. Garrick was fighting like a demon. He had backed himself against the stone wall of the arena to prevent being surrounded. A pile of 4 guards lay groaning at his feet. But he was fading. The wound in his side was weeping blood, soaking his trousers. His vision was swimming. A guard managed to land a kick to Garrick's bad shoulder. The pain was blinding, white-hot lightning that made his knees buckle. "He went down, finish him," the captain roared, raising his broadsword. Garrick looked up. He couldn't lift his sword. This was it, but the blow never landed. Something heavy and velvet landed on the sand between Garrick and the executioner. Then a body followed. Queen Seraphina had jumped. It was a 15-foot drop from the royal box. She hit the sand, her expensive gown billowing around her, and rolled with a grace that surprised everyone. She scrambled to her feet and threw herself over Garrick's prone body, spreading her arms wide. The guard captain froze mid-swing, his blade inches from the queen's nose. "Touch him," Seraphina screamed, staring up at the captain with eyes of cold fury, "and you commit treason against the crown. By the old laws, I am his. I am his property. To damage his property is to steal from a victor." The entire arena went deathly silent. The crowd, 50,000 strong, stood up. They had come for blood, but they were witnessing a legend. "The law," a solitary voice shouted from the stands. It was an old man, a commoner. "The law," another voice joined in. "The law. The law. The law." The chant began to ripple through the stadium. It grew louder, a thunderous rebuke of the king. The people were tired of Thorn's tyranny, and seeing their queen, beautiful, untouchable Seraphina, covered in sand, protecting a wounded beggar knight, ignited a spark of revolution. The guard captain looked up at the king, then down at the queen. He lowered his sword. He looked at his men. "Back away," the captain ordered quietly, "kill them both." Thorn shrieked from the balcony, his face contorted with madness. "I am the king. I am the law." "Not today," Garrick groaned. Garrick used the wall to push himself up. He groaned, his face gray with pain. He looked at Seraphina. Up close, he could see the terror in her eyes, but also the fierce determination. "You shouldn't have done that," Garrick rasped. "I'm a dead man walking." "Then walk faster," Seraphina whispered, grabbing his good arm and pulling it over her shoulder. "The tunnel to the beast cages. It's the only way out." They began to limp across the sand. The 50 guards parted like the Red Sea. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also men of Valoria, and the weight of the crowd's judgment, and the bravery of the queen, held them at bay, stopped them. Thorn screamed. He grabbed a crossbow from a nearby guard. His hands were shaking. He aimed at Garrick's back. Twang! The bolt flew, but Thorn's aim was poor, and his hands were shaking with rage. The bolt missed Garrick by inches, whizzing past his ear and striking the sand. The crowd roared in anger. Someone threw a rotten cabbage at the royal box. Then a stone. Then a seat cushion. Within seconds, the stands were rioting. The people were storming the lower walls. The guards were forced to turn away from Garrick and Seraphina to hold back the tide of the mob. "Go!" Seraphina urged, dragging Garrick's heavy weight. They reached the heavy iron grate of the beast gate. It was locked. Garrick leaned against the bars, gasping for air. "It's locked. We're trapped." Seraphina reached into her bodice. She pulled out a small, intricate iron key on a silk ribbon. Garrick looked at her, confused. "How? I've carried the key to the tiger cages for 3 years," she said, her hands shaking as she jammed the key into the lock. "I plan to feed myself to them one day." To end it, the lock clicked. The gate creaked open. They slipped into the darkness of the tunnels just as the first wave of loyalist reinforcements burst into the arena behind them. The tunnels under the arena were a labyrinth of damp stone, smelling of wet fur, excrement, and old blood. It was pitch black. Seraphina supported Garrick, guiding him through the dark. She seemed to know the way. "Keep moving," she whispered. "If we stop, you bleed out." "Why?" Garrick asked, his voice slurring. He was losing too much blood. "Why did you accept the claim?" "You don't know me." Seraphina stopped. They were in a small alcove, safe for a moment. She reached out in the dark and touched his face, her fingers finding the rough beard, the sweat, the scars. "Don't lie to me, Garrick," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I would know the way you stand anywhere. I would know the way you fight." She pulled a small dagger from her belt, a ceremonial piece, but sharp, and cut a strip from her ruined white dress. She began to bind the wound in his side, 10 years ago. She said softly, tightening the bandage. "A stable boy named Gareth. He was sent to war to die because he dared to give a flower to a princess." Gareth winced as she tightened the knot. He leaned his head back against the cold stone wall. The secret he had buried under a decade of war and a fake name was out. "I was told you died," Seraphina said, tears finally falling in the safety of the dark. "They told me you died in the vanguard charge." "I did," Garrick whispered. "The boy died. The stray survived." He looked at her. "I came back to kill him, Seraphina. I didn't enter the tournament for the gold. I entered to get close enough to put a sword in Thorn's throat. But when I saw you, I couldn't leave you there." A heavy thud echoed down the tunnel. Then the sound of barking. "Dogs," Garrick said, trying to push himself off the wall. "He's released the hounds." Seraphina grabbed his hand. "The sewers. The drainage pipe leads to the river. It's our only chance." They stumbled deeper into the catacombs. The sound of the dogs grew louder, baying for blood. They turned a corner and found themselves at the edge of a massive cistern. A narrow stone ledge ran along the wall, slippery with moss. Below, the black water rushed toward the city outflow. "Can you swim?" Seraphina asked, with one arm. Garrick grimaced. "I'll sink like a stone." "Then I'll pull you," she said fiercely. Suddenly, the tunnel behind them lit up with torchlight. Shadows stretched long and distorted against the walls. "There," a voice shouted. "Corner them." It was Vane, the king's torture master, flanked by 6 armored trackers and 3 massive mastiffs straining at their chains. They were trapped. The ledge was too narrow to fight on. The water below was fast and dangerous. Vane smiled, his teeth yellow in the torchlight. He drew a serrated blade. "The king wants the queen alive," he sneered. "But he said I can take my time with the stray. He wants you to scream for a few days." Garrick looked at the water, then at the men. He looked at Seraphina. He realized he couldn't protect her here. He was too weak. If they fought, they would be overwhelmed. He squeezed her hand. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Always," she said. "Then forgive me." Garrick didn't jump. He didn't fight. He shoved Seraphina. With his last ounce of strength, he pushed the queen off the ledge, sending her plummeting into the dark, rushing water below. She screamed his name as she fell, a splash swallowing her cry. She was safe. The current would take her out of the city. Now, Garrick was alone. He turned to face Vane and the dogs. He raised the white lion's sword with his trembling right hand. He was going to die here, in the dark, covered in filth. But he had one. She was free. Come on then, Garrick whispered, a bloody smile cutting across his face. Let's see how many of you I can take to hell with me. Vane laughed and released the chains. Get him. The dogs launched themselves into the air. The first mastiff hit Garrick like a cannonball wrapped in fur and muscle. The impact drove the air from his lungs and slammed him back against the slimy stone wall of the cistern. Jaws clamped onto his left forearm, the one with the dislocated shoulder. Pain, white and blinding, exploded behind his eyes, but the rusted steel vambrace held, protecting the bone from shattering instantly. Garrick didn't scream. He didn't have the breath for it. He converted the scream into a guttural roar of effort. He dropped the white lion's sword, grabbed the dog's thick leather collar with his good hand, and used the animal's own momentum to swing it. With a sickening crunch, he smashed the dog's head against the stone wall. The beast went limp, sliding off his arm into the dark water below, but there were two more. And Vane. And 6 soldiers. The second dog lunged for his throat. Garrick ducked, the snap of teeth missing his ear by an inch. He drove his knee into the dog's ribs, hearing them crack, and kicked it off the ledge. The third dog hesitated, growling low, sensing the predator in the man. Call it off, Vane. Garrick rasped, picking up his sword again. His left arm was now completely useless, dangling like dead weight. Blood from his side was pooling in his boot. Or I carve it up too, Vane, the torture master, chuckled. The sound echoed eerily in the tunnel. He signaled the soldiers to hold back. He wanted to enjoy this. You have spirit, Stray, Vane said, stepping onto the narrow ledge, his serrated blade glinting in the torchlight. The king was right to fear you. But spirit doesn't stop steel. Vane lunged. He was fast, faster than a man of his size should be. Garrick parried, sparks flying as the Valerian steel met the serrated torture blade. The vibration jarred Garrick's injured shoulder, sending waves of nausea through him. Garrick stumbled back, his heel catching on a patch of moss. He was inches from the edge. Where is she? Vane hissed, pressing his advantage, his blade locked against Garrick's. Where is the queen? Where you'll never touch her, Garrick grunted. Head-butting Vane in the face, cartilage crunched. Vane stumbled back, blood pouring from his broken nose, but he didn't fall. He laughed, spitting out a tooth. It doesn't matter, Vane sneered. The river grate has a screen. It catches the trash. She'll drown against the bars. I'll fish her out when I'm done with you. The words hit Garrick harder than any sword. The grate. If there was a grate at the end of the outflow, Serafina wasn't safe. She was trapped underwater, drowning in the dark. Time stopped. Garrick looked at Vane. He looked at the 6 soldiers inching closer. He looked at the massive wooden support beam that held up the ancient stone ceiling of the cistern directly above them. It was rotted, waterlogged, and groaning under the weight of the city above. You're right, Vane, Garrick whispered, his eyes going cold. Spirit doesn't stop steel. Garrick suddenly stopped fighting. He didn't swing at Vane, he swung at the beam. He put every ounce of his remaining strength, every drop of hatred for the king, every memory of the stable boy who loved a princess, into one final, desperate overhead strike. The white lion's sword, the finest blade in the kingdom, bit deep into the rotting wood. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. A spiderweb of fractures shot up the timber. Dust and pebbles began to rain down from the ceiling. Vane's eyes went wide. He looked up. Realizing too late what the madman had done, no. Vane screamed, turning to run, but the ceiling gave way. Tons of stone, earth, and city street crashed down into the cistern. The ledge disintegrated. The torches were snuffed out instantly. Vane, the soldiers, the dog, and Garrick were all swept away in an avalanche of darkness and debris. The collapse hit the water with the force of a tsunami. The shockwave hit Garrick like a physical blow. He was underwater, tumbling in the pitch black, surrounded by falling rocks and churning currents. He didn't know which way was up. His armor was dragging him down. His lungs burned, he flailed, his hand brushing against something metal. The grate. Vane was right. It was blocked. Garrick felt the current pinning him against the iron bars. He felt debris piling up against him. He was going to die here, pressed against the grate, inches from freedom. Then, his hand touched something else. Cloth. Silk. Serafina. She was there, pinned against the grate next to him, struggling feebly. The realization gave Garrick one last burst of impossible strength. He wasn't trying to save himself anymore. He found the locking mechanism of the grate in the dark. It was rusted shut. He jammed his fingers into the mechanism, ignoring the pain as the metal tore his skin. He braced his feet against the stone masonry. He pulled. He pulled until the tendons in his neck felt like they would snap. He screamed bubbles into the black water. Clang, the ancient hinges gave way. The grate swung open, the pressure released instantly. The river sucked them out, expelling them from the bowels of the city and into the open, freezing waters of the Black River. They tumbled over the falls, crashing into the deep pool below. Garrick woke up to the feeling of mud in his mouth. He coughed, retching up river water. His body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. He couldn't feel his left arm at all. He tried to move, but pain pinned him to the earth. He was lying on a muddy bank, miles downstream from the city. The sun was rising, casting a pale, gray light over the reeds. "Stay still," a voice whispered. Garrick turned his head. Serafina was kneeling beside him. Her dress was in tatters, her hair was matted with mud, and she was shivering uncontrollably. But she was alive. She was pressing a handful of wet moss against the stab wound in his side to stop the bleeding. "You." Garrick rasped, his voice a broken croak. "You're alive, because of you," she said, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Again, Garrick looked past her, toward the horizon. In the distance, a plume of black smoke was rising from the city of Hytera. It was coming from the palace district. "The city," Garrick whispered. "The people rose," Serafina said softly. "While we were in the tunnels. I heard the bells. The warning bells. The king's guard was overwhelmed. The collapse you caused, it must have been felt in the palace." Garrick let his head fall back onto the mud. "They'll come looking for us. Thorn won't stop. Thorn is dead, Gareth," Serafina said. Garrick looked at her sharp, intelligent eyes. "How do you know?" "Because the bells have stopped ringing," she said. "And the flags on the towers, look." Garrick squinted. The royal standard, the golden sun of Thorn, was gone. In its place, a simple white banner was flying. The sign of a ceasefire. The sign of the people. "He's gone," she whispered, a sob finally escaping her throat. "The nightmare is over." They sat there for a long time, the silence of the river broken only by the cry of a heron. Two ghosts who had drowned and come back to life. "You should go back," Garrick said finally. He tried to sit up, wincing. "They'll need a queen. A real one. Not a bird in a cage." Serafina looked at the city, the place of her torment, the place of her imprisonment. Then she looked at the man lying in the mud. The man who had refused a fortune. The man who had destroyed a tunnel to save her. The stable boy who had never forgotten her. She slowly reached up and unclasped the heavy diamond necklace that was still around her neck, the last chain of her slavery. She looked at the glittering gems, worth more than the arena prize. She threw it into the river. It splashed and sank without a trace. "The queen died in the river," Serafina said, turning back to him. Her voice was steady. "Hytera can find a new ruler. They have a council. They have the law." She reached out and took his good hand. Her fingers interlaced with his, dirt and blood mixing together. "I am not a queen anymore," she said. "I am Serafina. And I belong to the victor." Garrick looked at her, really looked at her, stripping away the titles and the trauma. He saw the girl from the stables. "I have nothing," Garrick said. "No gold. No title. Just a broken body and a bounty on my head." "You have a horse," she smiled weakly, pointing to a piece of driftwood. "If we pretend, and we have the north," Garrick added, a faint hope kindling in his chest. "Beyond the mountains. Where the king's law doesn't reach, take me there, she whispered. 6 months later, the tavern in the border town of Northwatch was loud and smelled of roasted pork and cheap ale. Travelers from all over the realm stopped here before crossing the Great Pass. In the corner, a bard was strumming a lute, singing a song that had become popular in the south. It was called "The Knight and the Lioness." He threw the gold to the dusting floor, and claimed the love he'd known before. The king did scream. The castle fell, but they walked out of the gates of hell. At a small table near the fire, a man and a woman sat eating a simple stew. The man had a stiff left arm and a scar running down the side of his face. He wore simple wool, like a farmer. The woman wore a plain linen dress, her hair tied back in a braid. She looked tired, her hands calloused from work, but her eyes were bright. The man paused as he heard the lyrics. He looked at the woman, she smiled and kicked him gently under the table. "It's a catchy tune," she teased. "Though they got the part about the dragon wrong. I never fought a dragon," the man grumbled, tearing a piece of bread. "It was just a very large dog." "Let them have their stories, Gareth," she said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "We have the truth." The door of the tavern opened, and a gust of cold wind blew in. The man instinctively reached for the dagger at his belt, his eyes scanning the room. Old habits died hard. But it was just a merchant, he relaxed. He looked at Serafina. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at him. He realized then that he was the richest man in the world. He had walked into the arena with nothing, and he had walked out with everything. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yes," the former queen of Hytera said, standing up and grabbing her cloak. "The garden needs weeding." They walked out into the snow, hand in hand, leaving the song and the legend behind them, disappearing into the quiet, white freedom of the mountains.